Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by truck and 4x4 enthusiasts. I'm your host and founder of Classic 4x4, Chris Picconi. Please make sure to review and subscribe to the podcast on your listening platform. Follow and like Classic 4x4 on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our channel and check out our episodes on YouTube. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you sell your truck or 4x4. Visit classic4x4.com for more details. Thank you for listening and enjoy the episode. Well, hello, Classic 4x4 podcast listeners. I'm your host, Chris Picconi, and this is the 2024 mid-year collector truck and 4x4 market update episode. And today's guest actually isn't really a guest. I'm bringing him on as a co-host, somebody that you know that has been on the show before, Brian Ellis, the CEO and co-founder of Fourbie Exchange. What's going on, Brian?
Hey, Chris, great to be here, man. Really great to talk to you again.
I really appreciate you taking the time and also not just being a guest, being actual a co-host, because you have a lot of value to add in this space, not only with the truck and 4x4 markets, but also marketplaces. There's a lot going on in the markets, a lot going on with marketplaces, especially on regulation. There's a lot of shadiness going on with a lot of marketplaces. Obviously not Fourbie Exchange. You guys are doing everything on the up and up, but there's a lot to talk about here. So we're gonna have a fun show today. We're going to be talking about the collector vehicle market and giving an overview of the collector vehicle market as a whole. We're going to be talking about marketplaces and also, most importantly, the collector truck and 4x4 market. We're going to talk about, give an overview there, a lot of the trends, what's going on in the truck and 4x4 markets, and what's hot and what's not. Little update since we last had a market update, which was our year-end 2023 market update and 2024 outlook. So as everybody knows, in 2023, the collector vehicle market was heavily imbalanced after almost 5 years of appreciation and a bull market in the collector vehicle market, really 2017 to 2022. The market whipsawed, and in 2023, we saw a significant pullback. And I had kind of predicted on our last year-end market update episode that we may see some, the trends and the metrics were indicating that we may see some stabilization. Well, in the first quarter of the year, though it was volatile, we did see some stabilization. And in the second quarter of this year, we 100% saw some stabilization. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and the market as a whole. But before we get into that, what's going on over at Fourbie Exchange, Brian?
Yeah, man, it's been, I think for all the reasons you stated and then some, it's just been a really fascinating first half of the year, right? We've seen a lot of changes in marketplaces in general. And we've seen some of those predictions, as you were mentioning, for vehicles within the segment come to fruition, and then some changes within, some things happening a little bit faster than we thought. But for Fourbie, it's just been a really great first half of the year. Traffic is booming. We're bringing in more and more interesting inventory to the marketplace. One of the big focuses for us in the first half of the year is really turning back to those premium listings, right? Those really full-featured, immersive experiences to help showcase the vehicles. That's something that we started on, right? Is full-featured articles. Let's get into the history. Let's get into the valuation. Let's have some good writing. Let's showcase these pieces. But it's something we've really double-clicked on since the beginning of this year. And so in addition to those premium images, the premium videos, and focusing on the immersion, it's Carfax for eligible vehicles and valuation guides, right? People want to know, what is the market doing? Is this a reasonable price, or what are some of the comps looking like? Within those two, it's been a fantastic response of buyers and interested parties being able to inquire directly, and as a value to sellers. Those inquiries are vetted by us, right? There's a real human vetting those inquiries to keep out spam, which, we all, my partners, Garrett and Joel and I, we all are active buyers and sellers and no strangers to the spam on other platforms. It's just a reality of some of these marketplaces. So a good value add to the sellers as part of those premium listings. And, sellers really seem to value a personal connection, right? That's something you and I have spoken to a bunch. It's, and the modern marketplace environment, that personal connection just starts to dissipate a little bit, but they appreciate, it's a 24-hour turnaround. It's professional writing. And actually interesting, it's a one-time cost. There's a lot of subscription fatigue, and it's been a really big trend, I think, in SaaS products in general, and marketplaces we're seeing a lot of value in is a one-time cost. I don't want to keep getting pinged all the time. I'll pay my fair share, but keep this simple for me. Another big thing that we've been just really focusing on, a big focus for us in the first half of the year, and it's going to continue into the second half, is shortening our iteration cycle. Being a smaller marketplace means that we can iterate, put updates in front of buyers and sellers, get that feedback, optimize on it, and repeat. So instead of taking big bites that are taking 3, 4, 5 months to develop and push out, how do we compound 1 or 2% incremental growth each week, right? And span that out over a couple months or a couple of years. We're really able to put some substantial growth and validated functionality into the marketplace, so we know that there's a product market fit. A big thing that Garrett, our sales or our chief revenue officer, likes to focus on is we're about building a wall through placing bricks perfectly, right? It's not about just throwing as many bricks up as you possibly can to build the wall. It's about placing the bricks perfectly, and that's a big focus for us. And in the end of the day, it's going to mean dealers and sellers are going to have an easier time listing with us. They're going to have more confidence, and buying and browsing is just going to be fun, right? That's where we got into it. Is we're all car enthusiasts, big truck and 4x4 enthusiasts, and we just wanted a better way to, scan and browse inventory and spend our money. So we're just excited to kind of focus on those two things. How do we make and diversify our ways of listing, so we're meeting sellers and buyers where they are, but then also how do we just make it fun? So that's our big focus right now.
You bring up actually a really great point, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we talk about marketplaces, is, being a segment player, just focused, a marketplace that offers auctions, a make offer product or a classified product, right? You're just focused in truck and 4x4s. So your goal is not to scale to be the absolute biggest. It's, yes, to be the biggest in your segment, but really to be the best, right? And you have that human touch, that human experience that the large scale marketplaces don't have, because they just need to be the biggest. They need to get as much inventory as they possibly can, and they have to automate as much as possible. And the economics don't make sense to allow them to have that human interaction. But you guys provide that human interaction, work with the sellers, work with the buyers, and also you're a captive marketplace. There's no noise. There's no noise of other types of vehicles. It's just collector, classic, and specialty and custom trucks and 4x4s. And if that's what you're looking for all of our listeners out there, you got to check out Fourbie.com. Follow them on all the social channels at Fourbie Exchange. So if you don't follow them on Instagram, Facebook, check out their YouTube channel and check out their website where you can fortunately browse trucks and 4x4s.
Find cool stuff. Yeah,
exactly. So let's move on into the next section, which is, let's talk about the broader collector vehicle market. This is an area where you and I are very, 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 have our finger on the pulse. We're very close to it. And there's been a lot of, generational drivers. I'm interested to see what your thoughts are there.
You're absolutely right. It's a changing of the guard, right? Millennials and Gen X, they have that disposable income and their share of wallet. We're seeing it go toward, myself included, some leisure and entertainment. And with that, there's, really kind of two unbeatable forces at play with that generation coming through and having the disposable income. There's that, sense of what was once unobtainable is now within reach, right? I always loved E46s or the E39s, but Cyclones or the Typhoons or, a 2JZ Supra, those kind of really unobtainable cars that you kind of grew up on, seeing those come into market. But then that old school cool where we thrive, the OBS Fords or the square bodies or 80s and 90s series or 100 series rather, TLCs, V8 4Runners are hot. It's what are those kind of niche or kind of specialty vehicles that, if you know, you know. So we're seeing a lot of those types of vehicles coming to become a lot hotter, especially with a younger audience. And I think that there's also just an inherent desire to get away from the screen and to get out there and work with your hands. And it's those more recent cars, those 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s, where you can still work on it and you can still learn and you can still have some aftermarket support with you. So we're seeing just an influx of a new generation of buyer. And I think with that is a lot of different market dynamics, both in terms of what's selling and what's not, and then also the demands of the marketplace. And I think that speaks to what you were talking about earlier on, is the changes and the evolution of the marketplace in general over the first half. That's really come in fast, I think a lot faster than we thought. But I'm curious, from your side too, you get so many inbound through Classic 4x4. You talk to so many sellers. What are you seeing, and what kind of buyers are you connecting with on your side?
Yeah, I got to tell you, to get more granular on that generational change that you talk about. And I agree with you. That is by far the biggest driver of the collector vehicle market, is the generational change, right? So right now, if you look at the generation that is, has that, that disposable, is willing to, has that disposable income, is looking to buy a collector vehicle, that generation really falls between, being born in, like, say, the mid to late 60s to, like, the early to mid 80s, really falls in that 35-year-old to 55-year-old demographic. And in that period of time, what did we see? What were our parents driving? When we were sitting in the back of the station wagon, what were we looking at on the highway while we were taking our trips? Was, SUVs, trucks, because that was a period of time where, especially, in the truck and 4x4 market, the mid 60s was an inflection point. Pre the 60s, trucks and 4x4s were really just utilitarian vehicles. They were purpose built. They were essentially farm implements and, a means to an end for a tradesman, right? It was really in the mid 60s and even into the early 70s where they really became daily drivers. So, our demographic, that 35 to 55, now that, we have that discretionary income and we're looking to buy collector vehicles, what are we buying? The cool stuff, the stuff we thought was cool when we were kids. And that is trucks and 4x4s. And
100%.
that is why the truck and 4x4 market has grown exponentially. It's been a segment of the collector vehicle market that has seen an immense amount of appreciation overall. And I really think that is the biggest trend and the biggest takeaway right now, is that is the generational change has the wind at our back for trucks and 4x4s right now. So as the truck and 4x4 market and those vehicles in the the late 60s, early 70s, all the way through the mid to late 80s are very popular right now. Sadly enough, we're seeing the previous generations vehicles start to actually become less desirable. Those markets are shrinking. Primarily the 30s, 40s, 50s, and early 60s stuff, right? Our parents' generation, and actually our father-in-laws are the best example, right? So
That's right.
give our listeners a little background. My father-in-law and Brian's father-in-law are like devout English sports car collectors, because that's what was cool when they were young, right? When they were growing up in the 50s and the 60s, like that's what was cool, was Austin Healey's, MGs,
right. MG,
like,
yeah, exactly.
And when they hit the period that we are in our life, I'd say about 20 years ago, when they hit the period where they had discretionary spending, they were buying collector vehicle cars or collector vehicles. They were buying English sports cars. And my father-in-law, your father-in-law, have some of the most beautiful Austin Healey's and MGs and Triumphs in their collection, right? And they rode those things all the way up. and now we're riding them all the way down. So the previous generation's vehicles, that market is actually shrinking as that generation becomes less interested in collecting, sadly is aging out, dying off, right? The families are getting rid of them. So that generation is really starting to of vehicles is starting to contract, and that buyer pool is getting smaller. Why, as
Yeah.
our generation that demands trucks and 4x4s and has this insatiable appetite for trucks and 4x4s is growing and appreciating. But everything is a market cycle. Eventually that will change, and the next generation is going to be like, you know what? I want 90s and 2000s Trans Ams, right?
Right. Oof.
Yeah.
It's interesting. That's a persistent cycle, right? That's never going to end. Is 25 years old, like you start to see that get hotter and hotter. We're going to start to see early 2000s start to creep up pretty soon. But so that trend is cyclical. The byproduct of that too is, you look at some of those pre-war cars or those 40s, 50s, 60s, like you were mentioning. With that, the communities that surrounded that, you really had associations and clubs like you don't have anymore. And I think another part of that too is documentation, registrars, right? There was a documented history that went along with it. Yes, a lot of technology is coming to suit, but it'll be interesting to see how the next generation of collector really holds value toward documentation around some of these vehicles. It's just going to be very interesting. I think another component of that too is just, I mentioned the associations and clubs. It's Cars and Coffee now. Love it, right? Go to Cars and Coffee, a different one every weekend. Bring the kids. We can go there on a Sunday morning and be back before mom's up. It's great. You can have our day. Versus when I was growing up, we went on vacations, right? We'd go up to Cape May in one of the old cars and vacation with those communities. So it's really a cultural shift that's taking place as well surrounding the vehicles themselves. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Time will tell. But let's dig into the broader collector vehicle markets. The metrics are out, the numbers are out. We have data from the first and second quarter of 2024, and that data is telling us a lot of really, really interesting things. And I'll also kind of take a little step back for all of our listeners out there. If you've never listened to a market update episode before, there are really three key metrics that I focus on that are key indicators and really dictate the trends in the collector vehicle markets. The first is dollar volume, right? Dollar volume means the amount of vehicles that came to market, right, and successfully sold. The total dollar volume of vehicles that successfully sold in the market. The next is average sale price. So essentially taking that total dollar volume and dividing it by the number of transactions that happened in that period of time, that equates to an average sales price. And the last variable is sell-through. That is the number of vehicles that go to market and successfully sell. So, for example, we've all seen an auction out there where, the hammer goes down, it doesn't meet reserve. That means that vehicle did not sell through. But if the hammer goes down and the vehicle did sell, well, that means that the vehicle did successfully sell through. And that is a percentage. So essentially, if 10 vehicles go to market, 6 successfully sell, that would be considered a 60% sell through. Right. So those are the three variables that I look at and I hang my hat on to really dictate the trends. And in 2023, I alluded to this in the introduction. From 2017 to 2022, the collector vehicle market was hot. All three of those variables were essentially positive month over month, year over year. We saw an immense amount of appreciation. Everything was good. In 2023, we saw a whipsaw, and all three of those key metric variables essentially regressed month over month and year over year, every single month in 2023. And I started to see a little bit of stabilization and in the end of 2023, but again, the data wasn't out. We hadn't talked about the first quarter, and that stabilization has come to fruition. In the first quarter of this year, I'll just kind of throw some numbers out there. January, right? we actually saw dollar volume grow year over year. So we saw a 3.4% increase in the total amount of vehicles that transacted on a dollar volume basis to $640.3 million, right? So that means that more inventory came into the market. And we saw sell-through relatively flat year over year at 74%. So it was only up about 0.1%. But the biggest indicator that I think dictates the market kind of balancing out is the fact that the average sale price was down 14.3%. So the average sale price in January 2024 versus January 2023 went down 14.3% to $516, right? What does that tell me? That tells me that dollar volume is strong and growing. Sell-through is pretty flat, which tells me that more inventory is coming into the market, that there is demand and buyers on the other side of that inventory, and they are successfully purchasing those vehicles. But sellers are becoming more realistic with values in the market, and they're willing to sell vehicles at the expectations and valuations of current market. And that, in my opinion, is the inflection point that really dictates the balancing out. As we went into February, again, we saw a drastic decrease in dollar volume. It was down about 30% year over year. Average sale price, again, was down about 28%, telling us that those sellers are becoming more realistic. And sell-through was negligible, it was down 1%. As we went into March, I will tell you one of the most interesting variables, again, is that dollar volume was up 11% to $417.5 million. Average sale price was actually pretty flat year over year at $75,680. It was up about 3% year over year. But sell-through was down, which is interesting. Average sale price went up and sell-through went down. So maybe there were some unrealistic sellers out there again, but sell-through was down about 5%. I will tell you, and I'll give an asterisk to the first quarter of the year. The first quarter of the year is unique. We have a ton of transactions that happen, and they tend to happen in environments that are not traditional environments. As we've spoken about, time and time again, online marketplaces and online auctions dominate the majority of collector vehicle transactions, right? But live event auctions like Barrett-Jackson, RM Sotheby's, Mecum, those events happen throughout the year, and a lot of those events happen in the first quarter of the year, right? So there's kind of it's skewed. The first quarter is a little bit skewed. I always don't like to look at the first quarter data to dictate the rest of the year because it is skewed. You have a mass amount of inventory that's coming into the market in the first quarter. It really is happening in high fee premium marketplaces like, the in-lane live event type of auctions, the Mecum, the Barrett-Jacksons. Also, it skews a lot of the variables, especially dollar volume and sell-through. And Barrett-Jackson really skews that variable because Barrett-Jackson is a no reserve auction. So every single vehicle that goes across the block at Barrett-Jackson is 100% sell-through. Yeah. So if you look at January was, the sell-through was 74%, whereas February was 66%, March was 64%. Why? Because we had a huge Barrett-Jackson sale, and that throws off, every vehicle that went through the Barrett-Jackson sales in January in the first quarter is considered 100% sell-through. So it skews it a little bit. But the first quarter did really show signs of stabilization, though it was volatile. And those three key metrics were volatile. We did see signs of stabilization, which is awesome. And the biggest sign is the fact that average sale price pulled back heavily, which tells me that sellers are becoming more realistic with the market and buyers' level of valuations, right?
Yeah, and that's a huge change from 23 is that reality, right, of what things are worth. And that negotiation, that ability to help kind of coach and manage. I know you do a lot of that with your clients, and we talk a lot about those valuations and how those are changing over time. But there was a lot of resistance in 23, and I think that there's a lot of reality in 2024. So, and it benefits everybody, right? By being able to move that car down the line, a realistic price brings more confidence back into the market. So happy to see that.
And as we went into the second quarter is the real indicator, in my opinion, of how the collector vehicle market has seen stabilization. April, we saw dollar volume at $291.4 million, up 4%. Average sale price, again, down 3%, nothing negligible year over year to $46,599. And sell through was down 1% year over year to about 68%, right? So, the volatility we saw in the first quarter has kind of made its way out into the second quarter. We're starting to see some stabilization and, very negligible year over year change, 4%, down 3%, down 1%. So very negligible change. And that negligible year over year change tells me one thing, that the market is stabilizing. Then we get into May. The numbers in May, again, very negligible. Dollar volume was up 3%, average sale price was down 2%, and sell-through was up 1% to 65%. Again, negligible, but showing signs of true stability. The volatility's out. And June, I'm going to make a very, very aggressive prediction right now. June, in my opinion, though we don't have any of the July data yet because we are recording this in July, but I'm going to say that June of 2024 marks the bottom and an inflection point where we are going to see appreciation from here on up. Still might be some volatility, but I do believe the second half of the year we are going to see appreciation. And I'm going to call June as the bottom of the market right now, right?
That's
so all that bleeding from 2023, I think, is over, and the rest of 2024 and going into 2025, I'm optimistic, I'm bullish. But why do I feel comfortable making that call? That's because the key metrics in June showed one thing they haven't showed in almost 18 months. So dollar volume was $277.5 million, up 4%. Average sale price was $55,375, up 3%. And sell-through was 62%, up 1%. But that was the first time in almost 18 months where all three key metrics were positive, showed growth and appreciation. And that's what makes me feel comfortable saying that June could quite possibly be the bottom of the collector vehicle market. Q2, it really was flat with minimal volatility across the board, but it really, that data supports that the market has balanced out. And again, June of 2024 was really the first month where in almost 18 months where we didn't see any volatility or any negative key metric variables. So we'll see what the end of the year dictates. I still see maybe a little bit of volatility, but I'm very bullish, and I really like what the numbers are telling us. And I really do feel that the trends are all pointed in the right direction. We're going to see some appreciation here. What trends are you seeing, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think that the rest of the year looks really strong. I think that we are going to continue to see buyers and sellers engage as long as the marketplaces are responding to the needs of those buyers. I think you made a great point about those live auctions, right? There is a great place for them, and they are really driving those top dollar sales. One of the market we track, we hyper-focus on about 40 to 45 markets within the truck and 4x4 segment. It is a very strong first half, right? We're seeing appreciation in values. We're still seeing strong sell-through. So as a subset of the total numbers you're sharing here, just a lot of resilience within the truck and 4x4 space. It's interesting to see that those high dollar values continue to flow through live auctions. So even though the digital auctions are crushing in terms of total sales and crushing in terms of the sales dollars that are coming through, it's those top dollars coming into the Barrett Jacksons, right? Look at Power Wagons. There was 2 Power Wagons out of like 25 or 30 that were sold in the first half. Two of them sold for over $350,000 at Barrett Jackson, and it's driving that top line data that's coming into some of those individual markets. But yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think the sentiment is changing around buyers and sellers, and yeah, love to see it continue through the rest of this year.
The market has legs going throughout the remainder of 2024, in my opinion, and the market's going to continue to balance out because it has balanced out already. So I'm very optimistic going into the end of 2024, and cautiously optimistic going into 2025 post election and what happens with our economy, because we are very the collector vehicle market does have a direct correlation to the overall macroeconomic variables out there.
I think, it's just been a fascinating year to begin with. But Chris, I know you have a very good perspective. You coach your clients on, market placement. So I'm curious your take on, what are you seeing in those marketplaces? What are you seeing as some of those challenges and some of those opportunities within the marketplace?
It's interesting. I was just on the ATI Auto Business Show with, you brought up Hemmings. We both happen to know Jonathan Hemmings, or I'm sorry, Jonathan Shaw, who's the president of Hemmings. And, this came up on that show. So for all our listeners out there, check out the ATI Auto Business Show. Jonathan Shaw and myself were guests on that. We talked a lot about marketplaces and the integrity of marketplaces. But on a more macro view, when I look at marketplaces, and I do a lot of business with marketplaces at Classic 4x4, because I have to leverage those marketplaces to help to effectively sell my clients' trucks and 4x4s, right? So on a macro basis, marketplaces are essential to collector and enthusiast vehicle owners, because it creates liquidity and transparency for us, right? We need a place to buy and sell these things. But one of the biggest trends I'm seeing right now, especially as a lot of marketplaces pop up, is not all marketplaces are created equal. And what I mean by that is really there's three core pillars or tenets that when I evaluate a marketplace, that I look for, to have those attributes, right? And to really be not only a efficiently functioning marketplace, but an efficiently functioning marketplace that has integrity, that you can trust. And sadly enough, there are a lot of marketplaces out there that I just won't do business with. I will not present my clients' vehicles within those marketplaces, because they just don't operate with integrity, right? But that is the minority. The majority, the Fourbies, the Hemmings, the Bring a Trailers, they do operate with integrity and do really have, these three core pillars. And those three core pillars, the first is, by far, is balance, right? A marketplace essentially is just a place to bring together buyers and sellers, right? But you need to balance the supply and demand equation. The supply side is the inventory and the sellers, but you can have all the inventory you want, but if you don't have buyers on the other end of that equation, right, you're going to have an imbalanced marketplace. So you want to make sure that you balance that out with the right number of the right amount of demand, which is really the buyer demand. So making sure that there is a good balance between supply and demand, buyers and sellers within the marketplace. And that is the responsibility of any marketplace, right? The other big variable, which we'll go a little bit deeper into, is integrity. Sadly enough, and I alluded to this earlier, is there are a lot of marketplaces that just operate without integrity. And when I define integrity, I'm talking about making sure that a marketplace, when they're listing a vehicle, they actually confirm the ownership of that vehicle. There are several marketplaces out there that will list a vehicle without confirming the ownership. So as a buyer, you're bidding or dealing with a seller that at the end of the day may not even own the vehicle, most likely doesn't even own the vehicle, on a marketplace that has never actually confirmed the ownership of that vehicle. That vehicle may not even exist. And sadly, that happens. So, you really need to make sure who you're doing business with is, vet out who you're doing business with. If you're not comfortable representing your own vehicle in the marketplace, you need to enlist an expert like myself at Classic 4x4, where I handle every aspect of the sale of the vehicle. I have relationships. I've vetted out all these marketplaces, but there's even another variable where there are vehicle representation companies and consignments and brokers, which is a whole nother conversation, which we can have at a later date. So if you are enlisting the help of an expert like myself at Classic 4x4, I have I enter into agreements, into actual contracts with my clients so they understand, what I'm going to be doing, what my responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are. They know what I'm going to be doing. They know what the fees are. Everything is above board. Everything's in black and white, right? And don't ever hesitate to ask a broker or a consignor or a representation or marketing firm for references, right? I have some pretty high end, ultra high net worth clients that I buy and sell their trucks and 4x4 for them. And the first thing they do is ask me for references. And I'm happy to give a reference because I actually operate with integrity. Everything I do is above board. There's no gray line. It's all black and white. And I actually do what I'm saying I'm going to do, which is kind of sadly rare in this business, but ask for references. Make sure that you know who you're dealing with. Whether it's a marketplace or it's a representation company, marketing company, broker, whatever it is. Make sure you understand who you're doing business with, and if you are doing business with somebody, make sure everything you have is in black and white. And if somebody isn't willing to enter and execute a contract with you, don't do business with them because there's a reason that they won't, right? So, integrity, what are the variables of integrity for a marketplace? The first is, I already mentioned it, is making sure that the marketplace is actually verifying ownership of the vehicle, right? That's a big one. The other big variable in integrity is making sure that, the buyers and sellers out there that are not trustworthy, that if they, are bad actors, that they end up on a blacklist, that they end up, I know Hemmings, BAT, Fourbie, all have a blacklist, and there are, and a lot of buyers and sellers don't realize this, especially the importers out there, right? Because they're sometimes the shadiest ones, but they don't realize once you do a marketplace wrong, you end up on a blacklist, right? Oh, so maintaining a blacklist, so integrity comes down to, not only verifying ownership, making sure that if there is a buyer or seller that is a bad actor, that they can't operate on that platform, any longer, and that most importantly, that the marketplace is disclosing all pertinent information, right? So if they have material information on a seller, on a buyer, on a vehicle itself, that they are properly disclosing all that material information. And again, that integrity lies on the shoulders of the marketplace. The last variable is trust. Trust falls on the shoulders of buyers and sellers. You need to make sure that you can trust the people that are in and transacting within these marketplaces. So, trust for a seller means that they're actually disclosing all the correct information and all the pertinent information of the vehicle. And when they enter into a no reserve auction or a reserve auction, and that vehicle hits the reserve, or if it's a no reserve auction, at the end of that no reserve auction, no matter what the price is, that they actually follow through with that transaction and sell to the buyer. But on the flip side, you have to have trust in buyers, that if a buyer is bidding or making an offer, that they're qualified to execute that, and they're going to execute that transaction. So really, when you're vetting through marketplaces are great. We need them. They create liquidity, they create transparency, but not all marketplaces are really, cut from the same piece of cloth. There's a lot out there that don't have integrity, but there are a lot that do have integrity. And you really need to make sure that you understand who you're dealing with, that there are, that there is good balance in the marketplace, that they operate with integrity, and the people that are transacting, the buyers and sellers, that you can trust within those marketplaces.
Yeah, you nailed it on that integrity piece, and that is, again, an emerging trend for 2H or 1H rather this year. Obviously, a big cornerstone of any marketplace from inception, but that has become just such a trend over this first half. you talked about that black book, right? And with that integrity, with that trust, the digital landscape offers a lot of transparency. And for every listing that you see on Fourbie, you don't see the hours that go in vetting and talking to those individuals, right? We want to stand behind any listing that goes up on the site. Not only that, but we're huge consumers of listings on other marketplaces, right? We just love the environment. So whatever it is with four wheels, we want to go check it out. And a lot of issues surface up, and a lot of issues have bubbled up historically, and we always, discuss those as a group. What can we learn from this? How can we be a little bit better? And who are those actors? You know, you and I both know a writer at the Drive named Caleb. I always consume Caleb's content as it comes on. He's a great truck and 4x4 writer. And, you mentioned the integrity and transparency component. Happened to read an article that came through from Caleb about a Purple Scout, a Barney Scout that popped through, and just some misdealings that were happening on one platform that were getting surfaced up on another one. And, kind of scrolling through it, and I happened to see a name there, a classic 4x4 Chris Picconi reference. Do you want to speak about that at all, or do you want to?
I'll talk about it. It's unfortunate that there are marketplaces that don't operate with, in my opinion, don't operate with integrity. And sadly, I got caught up in one of those marketplaces. I was the winning bidder and actually the victim of some what I feel is wrongdoing on behalf of a marketplace. So I'll kind of take a step back. So I'm always buying and selling collector trucks and 4x4s for my clients, but I also maintain my own personal collection. So part of my job is literally sitting in front of four screens all day long and watching these transactions and looking at data and scheduling my clients' vehicles and representing them in different marketplaces. But one day I came across a purple 1974 International Harvester Scout on Classique. Classique is an auction platform. They have coined themselves as the most trustworthy collector vehicle marketplace out there. And by the end of this story, in my opinion, I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with that, right? So I saw this no reserve auction. It was a 7-day no reserve auction for this purple 1974 International Harvester Scout, and my wife's favorite color is purple, right? Nice. So, and I will admit this will be the first time. This wouldn't have been the first time my wife had a purple vehicle in my collection, right? So I just anytime I come across a purple vehicle, if it's cool, especially a purple truck, I throw some bids out there. I'm like, you know what? Might as well throw some bids out there. If I can get it at a right number, I'll surprise her and be like, hey, here's a purple Scout. She'll be like, why did you buy that? I don't know why, but I'm like, it's yours. It's in our collection. It's purple. You love it, right? Yeah. So this purple Scout was pretty cool. It was out on Long Island, and it was a no reserve 7-day auction on Classique. So I started bidding, bam, I'm the winning bidder, right? So I end up winning this 1974 International Harvester Purple Scout on Classique in a no reserve auction. They send me multiple emails confirming I'm the winner. They also send me an email exchanging the seller's information, the whole 9 yards. Okay. And then about 3 hours later, I get an email from one of the representatives at Classique with the CEO, David Zisblatt, who was CC'd on this email, saying that, we had a technical difficulty and sorry, we can't honor the auction. Even though you're the winner, you won the no reserve auction. It wasn't supposed to be a no reserve auction. I said, what? That's not how it works, right? Yeah, right. It was a 7-day auction, right? So they had an auction representative that not only listed this vehicle on their platform, but also watched it for 7 days. Right, you also had a seller, right? Yeah. Who was selling this vehicle. So even if they were a passive seller, you're still going to maybe look at it once or twice. But this seller actually, who is, by the way, not the owner, right? Okay. The seller was not the owner. The seller was a broker that was affiliated with the owner's broker, which is even more wild. The fact that
Okay.
that can even happen, and in my opinion, you can't even prove ownership when you're that far away from the seller. But
100%. Right.
that's a whole nother ballgame. But you had a seller that that actually had commented on the auction, and so saying that they actually saw the auction. Wouldn't they have noticed that it was no reserve? But interestingly enough, David Zisblatt, who's the CEO of Classique, sent me an email and basically said, here's the deal. It was a technical error. Here's our terms and conditions. Go pound sand, right? I don't care. And oh, by the way, you know what? I know you've been through a little bit and we made a mistake, but maybe we'll discount your buyer fees in the future for you. And I wrote back and I basically, said, that's not acceptable. You created a inherent contract within your marketplace between buyers and sellers. And you're not saying it's the seller's fault, right? Which is weird, number one. Right. Why would a marketplace take the fall for this? But that's a whole nother conversation. But you're saying that, that we're not going to honor the auction. There was a technical error and it's covered under our terms and conditions, which I understand. Things happen. It's harder when it's a 7-day auction and you literally have people that are responsible for that 7-day auction looking at it for all 7 days, and you have sellers that are commenting on that auction that acknowledge that they've looked at that auction, right? But maybe there was an error, right? At the very least, as a business person, wouldn't you just hop on? I actually had requested, hey, let all the parties, let's hop on a phone call. Let's figure out a way to figure this out and make it right. Totally. And let's talk about this like professionals, right? Well, David again wrote me back another email, and I'll summarize that basically was like, it was an error. Here's our terms and conditions. I'm not getting on any calls, and this will be our last communication. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to hear from you ever again. I said, okay, no problem. And they even went as far to scrub their website of the auction and everything to do, which is super suspect in my opinion. But hey, whatever. It is what it is. And as you know, auctions and marketplaces are a hot topic issue. We're starting to see some regulation in that space. So basically, at the end of the day, I was the victim of a marketplace that, in my opinion, has some level of compromised integrity, that is setting up auctions either willy-nilly or knowingly setting up no reserve auctions. Again, I don't have the exact answer. It's just my opinion. Either, knowingly setting up no reserve auctions with the intention of not following through and blaming their terms and conditions. And even crazier, we talk about integrity. So as I dug a little bit deeper, and I actually ended up getting in touch with the actual owner of this scout, right? So this is wild. I did not know that this existed. There's this whole underworld and underbelly of brokers that all work together and market each other's vehicles without the unknowing of seller. I don't operate like that at Classic 4x4. When you enlist me and enter into a vehicle marketing agreement with me, I'm the one handling everything. I'm not empowering anybody else. I'm dealing with the marketplaces. I'm dealing with the photographers. I'm dealing with everything. But that's not how everybody works out there. And this is how I learned. So there's the seller, who is a very nice gentleman by the name of Tom, who owns that 1974 International Scout. He enlisted the help of one of his friends, who is a independent broker by the name of Brandon. Right. So Brandon and Tom had an agreement, right, and set a price. Brandon, who's this independent broker, is affiliated with another broker by the name of Michael Runnels, who's the president of Weeby Autos. So Brandon then enlists Michael Runnels from Weeby Autos to help to market that vehicle, right? So now you have the owner who's empowered Brandon. The owner is trusting Brandon. Brandon has now empowered Michael Runnels, who the owner doesn't even know, by the way. Right? To help to market his vehicle. Michael Runnels at Weeby Autos ends up has some type of relationship with a auction platform that specializes in Corvettes called 427 Stingray. I'm not familiar with them. I don't know how they play into this, but Michael Runnels basically ended up pointing the finger at 427 Stingray and saying, "Hey, I have no interaction with Classique. I actually work with this company called this other auction house called 427 Stingray, and my arrangement with them is that they can market any of my vehicles on my site however they want, as long as they set the reserve at the asking price." Right. So apparently, somewhere between Michael Runnels and Classique, there was another party, 427 Stingray, that somehow, even though Michael Runnels was listed as the seller by Classique, there's some other party in between there. So between the actual owner of the vehicle and the auction, there were like 3 brokers or affiliated parties. That is wild. The fact that exists, it's insane.
Yeah.
In my opinion, shady as can be either. Also, but hey, that's just my my humble opinion, right? So in the end, that's how the vehicle ended up at the Classique auction, no reserve auction. I ended up winning it, and then they ended up reneging on and calling it a technical error. And again, none of this is surprising to me because there were so many parties involved between the actual owner and the marketplace that, again, nobody had any allegiance to the owner. Right. It's not like when I contract with one of my clients, right, I have an allegiance and a responsibility to that owner. And that's why I handle everything personally. Right. Or one of my team members handles everything. There were so many different levels, that allowed and enabled this, shadiness, in my opinion, which is absolutely insane. So in the end, the victims were myself as the winning bidder of the no reserve auction, and the actual owner of the vehicle, because he had trusted somebody, and that person entrusted somebody else, and trusted somebody else, and trusted somebody else, and that's how it ended up. So sadly, as I talked to the owner of the vehicle, he wasn't even aware that it was being auctioned on this platform, right? Which brings me to the next level of concern from integrity, which is probably the most simple thing that any platform can do, any marketplace can do, is just verify ownership, right? So interestingly enough, the owner told me himself that he had never provided ownership documents to anyone, even the independent broker that he enlisted, his friend Brandon. So again, I can't confirm this or deny this, whatever it is, but I'm very, very, very confident, and it's my opinion, that there's no way that Classique in any way, was able to verify ownership of that vehicle, and they were, transacting a vehicle that they didn't even know who the owner was, which is sad because there were no agreements tying them back to it. So it's a sad scenario. David Zisblatt, how he handled it was very poor, in my opinion. He should have been a business person that operates with integrity, a strong moral and ethical compass. But the way he handled it was just poor, in my opinion. Not the way that a business person should, and the way that they're managing that platform, really makes me question their integrity. So we're going to put them in the classic 4x4 hall of shame, right? And a marketplace that I would never ever leverage, and hope there were some lessons learned from people listening, that Classique is one of those few that, in my opinion, the reason I'm comfortable saying this is because it happened to me personally, is one of those marketplaces that operates without integrity and cannot be trusted. So that's kind of how that played out.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because the margins are so small, right? I mean, you're talking about these digital auctions, and trying to slice that across 4 or 5 different hands. That's what your integrity is worth, and it doesn't cost you much to operate with an integrity, but it can cost you a lot. Lapse in reputation, it really can be a dagger for some of these platforms, especially when you're talking about the small niche focused auctions or marketplaces where, one of your biggest challenges are network effects. You were talking about that earlier, the buyer and the seller dynamic. How do you build that? And it's one thing when you're doing that across several markets. It's another thing when you're hyper focused on a subset of that market. So if buyers or sellers feel that they can't sell on your platform, they won't list again. And that's a very small, tight community. But, I think you hit on just an interesting note with these auction platforms. online, offline, what do you feel like the next step? What are you looking for in 2H?
For auction platforms, I got to
Yeah.
tell you the what's interesting with auction platforms in general, right? And I leverage several different auction platforms. I've been doing less of bringing my clients' vehicles to auction recently. More so, I do a lot of direct placement.
Mhm.
Classifieds have kind of come back. The make offer product, I'm a huge advocate of, which you guys have at Fourbie. And the reason being is we've seen a lot of fatigue in the auction space, both by the
Mm.
buyers and sellers. And that was really driven by um, the pullback of 2023. What happened was, we had a lot of reserve auctions and a lot of reserve auction platforms out there where sellers were still operating on valuations in 2022. But as the market was pulling back, buyers were really only willing to pay current market values. So you had a disconnect between sellers that weren't realistic on the values and buyers that were realistic on values, and they weren't coming together. And so you had all these buyers that were bidding, all these
Mm.
sellers that were trying to sell, but they weren't coming together on these auction platforms because the reserves and the valuations weren't realistic, and that dropped sell through, through the floor, and it really burnt out these buyers and sellers because it's not a good experience. You had sellers that were bidding and they never end up with the vehicle. You have buyers that are bidding and they never end up with the vehicle. You have sellers that are trying to sell, but they don't have any buyers on the other end that aren't bidding it up. So it created a ton of what's kind of the best way to put it? It created a lot of fatigue between buyers and sellers, and they really lost interest in the auction format, right? And I started to see a revision towards classified and make offer products, right? Because you had buyers that were like, hey, seller, just tell me what you want for it, and I'll decide whether or not I'm going to make an offer
Right.
on it, or I'll reach out to you. And sellers were just like, you know what? I'm fatigued from this whole hidden reserve, and I'm not meeting the reserve. Let me just tell buyers what I want for it. And so you started to see almost a reversion, right, in the marketplace where buyers and sellers kind of went back to classifieds because a seller could say, hey, here's what I want. And a buyer could say, hey, here's what I'm going to pay for it. And let's try to come together. Right. It was a more transparent, transaction. And that's where the make offer product really kind of came into play. You guys have that. Hemmings has that. And I love that. And because it's kind of a hybrid, what it does is it allows a seller to go out there and say, hey, this is what I want for my vehicle. Right. And it empowers a buyer in a digital environment to make an offer on
Mhm.
that vehicle. It empowers the seller to make a counteroffer on that vehicle, but all happening within the digital environment within the marketplace, and allows them to come together. So, though I am seeing auctions as sellers become more realistic on reserves and sell through increases, I am seeing auctions gain more traction than they did last year. So I do see
Okay.
auctions continuing to grow in the second half of 2024, but there is a whole subsect of buyers and sellers that really, really continue to embrace and value the classified and make offer options out there.
Yeah, I think the make offer product is just fascinating to us in a lot of different ways, a lot of different mechanisms um, to bring forward a lot of buyer and seller dynamics. But one of the reasons why we've gravitated toward it, and I think that buyers and sellers have too, is that it appreciates data, right? So to your point, if a vehicle is reasonably priced, you're going to get offers, and you're going to get offers quickly. So while traditional standard classified listings have typically been slower, and we see auctions as a great way in 7 to 10 days, you have a decision, you have a result. If your vehicle is priced appropriately, it's going to move, and it's going to move quickly. And more often than not, my partner Garrett has a very deep roster of sellers that we work with. So if a good deal comes across, we can direct place a lot of those listings. If not, then we can really bring it to market appropriately and help coach and bring towards those buyers. But um, so it'll just be fascinating. I'm curious to see how those continue to evolve, both auctions, but then also different kind of listing types and who utilizes what.
I do think that the auction fatigue for buyers and sellers is subsiding a little bit, but there was a lesson learned for a lot of buyers and sellers, and they really reverted back to the classified and make offer platforms. Let's talk about what we're really here to talk about, which is the collector truck and 4x4 markets. That's what everybody really wants to talk about.
That's right.
We got a lot of really cool trends out there going on, and we alluded to some of those trends. And the biggest trend, I think, out there in the truck and 4x4 markets right now, hands down, is the early stuff. So we talked about that generational change when we were talking earlier about the broader collector vehicle markets. We are seeing that generational change impact the collector trucks and 4x4 markets. The early stuff, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the early 60s trucks and 4x4s right now, that generation that was buying those is losing interest in collecting. They're dying off. So there's a lot of supply out there, but sadly enough, there isn't as much demand because the buyer pool for those vehicles is also simultaneously decreasing and getting smaller. So we're seeing an immense amount of depreciation in early trucks and 4x4s, 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s stuff. It really is a shrinking market due to generational change. On the flip side,
anything in particular that you're seeing in that kind of generation that's slowing?
I would say the makes and models that I'm seeing that are slowing the most in that period of time really are the two-wheel drives, right? Because a lot of the early stuff was two-wheel drive. The real early stuff, when it was four-wheel drive, it was conversions, NAPCOs and stuff like that. Yeah, it was aftermarket conversions. So a vast majority of it is two-wheel drives in the early stuff. But two-wheel drives in the late stuff aren't doing well, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So to answer your question, Brian, the early stuff that I'm starting to see pull back, as I mentioned earlier, was the two-wheel drives, but stuff like the Chevy Apaches and the Task Forces, the Ford F1s, the F100s, the Dodge C and D series, the real early stuff. Where the market is just shrinking. On the flip side, where the market is growing and appreciating is the late 60s stuff, late 60s, 70s, 80s, the early 90s stuff right now. Those trucks and 4x4s continue to gain momentum. Again, we talked about that generational change, that 35 to 55 demographic. That is what we want right now. We have an insatiable appetite for it. And that's what's doing well. That market is growing. It's appreciating. To kind of call out a couple of, the variables there in the later stuff, the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, vehicles that are doing really well. Four-wheel drive. Basically, the separation in valuations between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drives in this market right now it's immense. You can look at square bodies. A C10 right now in the market, a C10 long bed square body two-wheel drive, you can get those things in the market, in good, clean, highly original condition in the $8,000 to $12,000 realm. On the flip side, a comparable K10, good, clean. I mean, you're in like the mid 30s to 40 grand.
Incredible.
Right? Essentially the same truck. The only difference is a four-wheel drive versus a two-wheel drive. That is a massive difference. Say, you can get a C10 square body, two-wheel drive, a good clean one for say 10 grand. And then the comparable K10, is 35 grand. That is a $25,000 swing between just two-wheel. The only difference is two-wheel and four-wheel drive is a massive swing. So buyers want four-wheel drives in this market. When it comes to trucks in general, especially pickup trucks, crew cabs, anything crew cab. Anything crew cab. Buyers right now, they want to be able to throw their family in it comfortably, and they want to, yes, it's cool to have a single cab that has a three-person bench seat, but if you have two kids, that doesn't work, right? You have a dog, that doesn't work. Crew cabs right now are just absolutely on fire. And to kind of compound my last two statements, four-wheel drive crew cabs are absolutely on fire when it comes to pickup trucks. And I'll talk about a couple of those, as we get a little bit deeper, and I talk about some of the what's hot and what's not in the market. But crew cabs are definitely very desirable. The other variable I'm seeing in the truck and 4x4 markets from a trend is customizations. The more customized a vehicle is, the narrower the market is, and the smaller the buyer pool is. So the more customized it is, and I'm not talking about resto mods, right? I'm not talking about the Coyote swapped Gen 2 Bronco. I'm not talking about the K5 with the LS swap, or the K20 Action Line with an LS swap. I'm talking about just very personalized customizations, colors, interiors, dressing, wheels, powertrain dressing, stuff like that. The more customized you're getting, the less desirable they're getting in the market, and it's really tough.
You can't price them properly. It's a hard thing to value, and it's a hard thing for sellers to part with.
What trends are you seeing out there in the truck and 4x4 markets right now?
We track, again, those 40 to 45 different markets. So we try to keep an eye on what's going up and down. And I think we all have our own personal interests too. I think from a data standpoint, we're seeing a lot of traction behind Scout Travelers. We're seeing a lot of traction behind not the first gen, but the second gen Bronco. Those are hot. Getting a little bit later in the 90s, early 2000s, I wouldn't have guessed it, but the first generation Silverado, huge. Great values, great appreciation. So that's been really great. The Ford freaking Ranger, man, that is it's got one of the best cult followings. But those have just been fantastic, just very strong. On the other side of that, we work with a lot of expedition vehicles. A lot are coming to market. Those have a very long cycle to begin with. And when the market gets flooded, that becomes very problematic. We're also seeing a lot of Japanese imports start to slow down, right? People don't want as much that novelty that they did a couple of years back of the right-hand drives and the imported. So things like the Delica or the hard body, they're just losing steam in the market. I think there's also, additionally, when you talk about those mini trucks and mini vans, there's a lot of legislation that's coming down that's making that more prohibitive. But conversely, ease of importation is becoming, more beneficial to buyers and sellers. So they don't have to transact on marketplaces quite as much. I can go right to, online and work through the importation cycle. So another one that's interestingly that's pulling back big time is the Hummer, the H1. You were talking earlier about a couple data points skewing the market. There's been a lot of top end AM General H1s that have done really, really well. But by and large, that market has just sunk big time over the past couple of months.
That's interesting. I at the end of last year, when I did my 2023 year-end market wrap up and 2024 market outlook, I kind of called out, and I want to revisit those makes and models that I talked about, what was hot and what's not. And it's interesting. A lot of the reasons that these makes and models are hot or not is because of the stuff you just said. Right-hand drive is a big one, which we'll talk about that. But revisiting what was hot, what my predictions were for what's hot in 2024 and what's not in 2024. The first one we're going to talk about is Chevy K5s. I have one in my own collection. Jonathan Shaw, as everybody knows, I've been helping him, advising his build. It's absolutely amazing that the president of Hemmings is reaching out to me to be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or where should I put the speakers? Nothing makes you feel better than that, right?
Yeah, right.
So, but big fan of K5s. I still see more legs here. First gen K5s, the 69 to 72s, they've been strong. They've been strong in the market for a long time. They're doing well. I do still see some upside in the first gen K5s, but not as much as I see in the second gen K5s right now. Second gen K5s, they had a long run 73 to 91, which is a really, really long run.
Yeah,
They
right.
are coming into their own right now. I see an immense amount of appreciation and opportunity in the second gen K5s.
Okay.
It's interesting. If the second gen K5s ran from 73 to 91, and they really, it had such a long run, you can actually break this, the second gen K5s down into three subsets.
Okay.
The first, the early ones, which were the ones that had the full removable tops,
Hmm.
right? So those were we'll call those the removable tops. So the early second gen K5s were the removable top, where the full top over the passenger, compartment or driver passenger compartment could be removed.
Hmm.
Those have seen an immense amount of appreciation. I still see some upside there. And then you have the kind of the middle, which are really what everybody thinks is thinks of as the second gen K5s, which is where the passenger and driver top became fixed, and there was just the rear removable top.
Right.
There's a lot out there in the market, and there's a lot of value and opportunity there for those
Mm.
mid-cycle second gen K5s. And what I have in my own collection, the reason I bought this in my own collection, because I think it's the most undervalued generation or sub generation of the K5, which is the late second gen
Mm.
K5, which was 1988 to 1991. So everybody knows that Chevy used a moniker for decades, the C and K moniker. The
Right.
C was indicated two-wheel drive, the K indicated four-wheel drive, right?
Right.
In 1988, so 1988 to 1991, they actually changed that moniker on the second gen K5s, and also a lot of the second gen K5s or the Blazers, and also a lot of the square bodies to R and V. So
Hmm.
the C two-wheel drive moniker got changed to R as the
Hmm.
new two-wheel drive moniker, and the V K moniker, four-wheel drive moniker, got changed to V four-wheel drive moniker. So the late second gen K5s, though all the enthusiasts and even the dealers still called them K5s, technically are called V5s or V10s. Right. So from 88 to 91, that's where I see the most value. And we've seen an immense amount of appreciation in the K5s, but I see an immense amount of value in the late
Interesting.
second gen K5s. And on to the next one is Scouts. I mean, Scouts continue to still rock and roll, man.
There's so many. Yeah. There's so many variations.
Oh man, I gotta tell you, they are still doing well in the market.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, where I think a lot of the value has already been priced in is in Scout 2s that are the short wheelbase, right?
Okay.
That's where the market wants. That's what the market has wanted for a long time. A lot of the buyers maybe aren't familiar with the longer wheelbase Travelers and Terras, right?
Hmm.
But the short wheelbase Scout 2s have seen an immense amount of appreciation. I still see some upside there.
Okay.
But really where I see the most value with Scout 2s right now, and I've mentioned this before, and we're starting to see that appreciation happen and people are realizing that value, is the longer wheelbase Scout 2s, the Travelers and the
Couldn't agree
Terras. The
more.
Traveler is just a longer wheelbase SUV, and the Terra is the longer wheelbase pickup truck.
Yeah.
I personally, this past winter, picked up a final year 1980 International Harvester Scout 2 Traveler, and the reason I did is because I actually practice what I preach, right? And I will tell you, I got it at a good number, good market value, paid the seller full, the right
Yep.
market value, but the market value at that time. And since I've purchased that, I will tell you, there has been a good amount of appreciation in the long wheelbases in the Scouts in general, but the long wheelbase Scout 2s, the Travelers and Terras. People are starting to realize that there's value. When you can find a short wheelbase, good, clean Scout 2 that has been nicely refurbished for 50 grand. Well, there was a time where you could find that exact same Traveler or Terra for 25 grand. But I think that time is kind of gone, and the Travelers and Terras are starting to appreciate. But where I see the most upside, and I think Scouts are going to continue to appreciate, whether it's the short wheelbase or long wheelbase, where I see the most value is in the longer wheelbase, the Travelers and the Terras,
Mm.
and we're starting to see those things really appreciate. Sadly enough, the 80s and the 800As and the 800Bs, we're starting to see a little bit of regression there. They're starting to pull back. They're unique, and I'm not talking about the the bespoke,
Sure.
beautifully
Right.
frame off, restored, or frame swapped, New Legend Scout 800 or something like
Mhm.
that. I'm talking about just the run of the mill, average, everyday, highly original, lightly modified, good condition driver or fully reconditioned driver Scout 80, 800. Those things got really lofty real quick, and
Yeah.
they're starting to pull back. So that, again, in my opinion, creates some opportunity, but I see way more upside and continued upside for the Scout 2 as we're starting to see the Scout effect, and Volkswagen Group now has a Scout brand, and they're going to
That's
bring
right.
out the Scout EV, similar to what
That's
we
a great
saw
point.
with the Broncos. And then the last one I talked about as what's hot was the 40 series Toyota FJ Land Cruisers. And man, I would like these things to be gaining more traction than they are. I love them, but the importers are just a victim of their own doing. They continue to bring these things in droves. They continue to oversupply the market, and it's just holding prices down.
Yeah.
I do think that the 40 series Land Cruiser market has bottomed, but
Okay.
it's not appreciating as much as I would like it to be. So though it started to depreciate before the broader collector vehicle and truck and 4x4 market, I do think we've seen a little bit of a bottom, but it's not. It's really kind of jumping on the bottom. We haven't seen the appreciation I'd like, and we're not going to see that until inventory gets tighter, and at some point importers are going to have to stop bringing this stuff in because the economics aren't going to work, and that'll create the inventory. A decreased supply equation, which will meet the demand and drive prices up. Go a little bit more granular there. The 40s, which are the short wheelbase, again, there's a ton of imports. It's really holding these things back from appreciating. There is demand for them, but it's really, we're not seeing. There are buyers on the other end of the spectrum. But one thing I've noticed, and I'm very proud of buyers out there for the 40 series Land Cruisers, is they're differentiating low quality imported versus high quality imported and
Yes.
US spec ones, right? So no question, US spec FJ40s operate in a whole different stratosphere, very similar to how the North American spec Defender 90s operate, right? But the imported ones, buyers are doing an amazing job of differentiating poor quality and high quality imported ones. So we are seeing some appreciation in the higher quality imported ones. The US spec ones are starting to see some appreciation, but the low quality imported FJ40s, they're just holding the market back. There's just a ton of them out there. There's just too much supply. I'm going to talk about the FJ43s, which are the medium wheelbase. They were never offered here in the US. I'm a huge fan of these things because nobody really knows about them. They know about the 40s or the longer wheelbase 45s. Nobody knows about the 43s. And I'm probably shooting myself in the foot right now because I'm out there looking for a 43 because I think they present a ton of value. So every 43 out there, I'm sorry, you were saying?
What is it, about a foot longer between the 43 and the 40?
It is about a foot longer. It's the medium wheelbase. It's right in between the 40 and the 45. They were never imported into the US. We never had them in the US. So all the 43s in this country were imported. And again, I see an immense amount of value. The 43s are actually transacting at levels that are below the 40s. So you can have a good, high quality, imported, restored 43 that is actually transacting at a lower number than its comparable shorter wheelbase 40. That's where I see the most upside opportunity and the most value right now in the 40 series market is in the medium wheelbase Toyota Land Cruiser FJ43s. And then my last comment on the Land Cruiser is going to be on the 45s, which are the long wheelbase. They were offered in two separate configurations, either pickup truck or the Troopies. Troopies are doing well. We're starting to see importers bring a lot of the pickups in. We're starting to see a little bit too much inventory right there. But again, testament to the buyers out there. They're separating the difference between low quality imported and high quality imported FJs, right? So the good high quality imported FJ 45s that are available out in the market are doing premiums, they're doing good numbers. The low quality stuff is just, it's not doing great numbers. The same holds through for the Troopies. You see a lot less Troopies out there. I love the Troopies. I actually just advised the purchase of one for one of my clients. I got to tell you, I love them. You don't see them a lot. But again, the good high quality stuff, the buyers are differentiating the high quality and the low quality imported stuff. The 45s were only offered here in the US for 2 years, 2 or 3 years. I think it was like 68 to 71. And that was just in the pickup truck version. So, but a vast majority of what you see on the 45 pickup truck and the Troopies are all imported, and buyers are doing a great job there. I don't know how much upside I see for the 45s, unless it's really, really high quality, bespoke frame off restoration. And that holds true with every vehicle. What are you seeing? And you mentioned you mentioned to me earlier the power wagons. I haven't taken notice. What's up with the power wagons going on these days?
They just have been resilient. They've been very strong for a very long time. There's not a lot of volume, but it's interesting because it bucks the trend a bit of, those pre-60s. I know they went a little bit longer, but we're just seeing high values being maintained despite some of that pullback. And a lot of them are custom rides. So it's interesting to see the power wagons continue to kind of buck the trend a little bit. Couldn't agree with you more about K5s and the Jimmies. Those have just been exploding. The K5s are up about 25% versus last year. So just a huge increase in valuation. But I couldn't agree more that the first generation, fantastic, beautiful, love the builds that are coming through. But I agree the opportunity is a little bit further down the road. I'm curious your take, though. We were talking about the Land Cruisers. I'm glad you went into that because, again, similar to the Scout, just so many variations, so many different types of buyers that can pull in. But one you didn't mention, what about the Iron Pig? What about the J55? You think that's going to get its day in the sun?
Dude, the FJ55s, I love them. They're a tertiary collector vehicle. When I talk about a tertiary collector vehicle, I take collector trucks and 4x4s and put them in buckets, right? The first is a primary collector vehicle, like a Jeep CJ7, a Jeep Grand Wagoneer, Toyota FJ40, a short wheelbase Scout 2. Those are vehicles that are well known in the collector communities, and your more novice collector that wants to have a Scout or wants to have a Jeep, they're looking for a short wheelbase Scout 2. They're looking for a CJ7. They're looking for a first gen K5. They're looking for a K10 square body. They're out there. So that's a primary. A secondary would be kind of like a CJ5 or like that doesn't get as much recognition, may not be known as well known to enthusiasts or more novice enthusiasts, like an FJ43 or a long wheelbase, Scout Traveler, one of those. But a tertiary market vehicle is tough because it's just one that really, even the most dedicated enthusiasts, it's not on their radar screen.
Right.
And even the novice enthusiast has never heard of it and it will never get on the radar screen. And that's where the FJ55 Iron Pig fits. They just don't transact at good numbers. The buyer pool is so small, and it's a very granular dedicated enthusiast buyer pool, and that buyer pool knows what they're worth and they know what they're going to pay for them. So unless you're completely realistic on an Iron Pig and an FJ55 Iron Pig, you're not selling, right? All those people out there that are trying to get 30, 40 grand for their FJ55 Iron Pigs, it's never happening. You don't have that needle in the haystack buyer, where they're transacting in the high teens to the, mid 20s, maybe even the high 20s, right? You have to be realistic with those tertiary market vehicles. And sadly enough, the Iron Pig is a tertiary market vehicle, but I do love it.
Who doesn't? What else? What else are you seeing that's in that not hot bucket?
Man, I'll talk about the three trucks that I mentioned at the end of last year, my 2023 market update and 2024 market outlook. They continue to sadly not be hot. Right. So the first and right at the top of the list, we've seen a lot of depreciation in this market, again, driven by importers bringing tons of them in. And it is ROW Land Rovers. And it doesn't matter what ROW, and when I talk about ROW for all of our listeners out there, it means rest of world, right? There are two different types of Land Rovers. There is the North American spec, which were imported here to the US. We call them as NAS. And then we have the vehicles that were built for the rest of the world, right? Which we call ROWs, which are primarily all the imported, which I should say are all the imported Land Rovers you see in this country. So whether it's a short wheelbase 90, 110, 130, Defender or Series, 88 or 109, all the ROWs they continue to be soft. They were soft last year. They continue to be soft. And it's primarily attributed to importers bringing these things in absolute hordes and just oversupplying the market, and that supply not meeting the demand right now. Because I will tell you, buyers, again, after 2023 have gotten very savvy. No matter how dedicated they are as an enthusiast or novice they are, they know the difference between what's quality, what's not quality. And now they know the difference between NAS and ROW.
Right.
So they're really differentiating that, and I see that market continuing to soften as more supply comes in. But what we're seeing a lot of in those ROW imported Land Rovers, which I don't even know why importers are still bringing these things in, because they are just tanking. And you mentioned this with the JDM imports, right-hand drives. For all you importers out there listening, Americans don't like right-hand drives, and they will not buy them, and they will not pay for them. Okay, I will say it again: Americans do not like right-hand drive vehicles.
Yeah, especially out of the gate, right? I mean, we do work with a few that offer some value add once they're imported, and that's really helpful, right? But yeah, couldn't agree more. Sit on that other side; it's going to be a tall leap.
Yeah, I mean, Americans just don't like, unless it's something unique like K-Trucks. Yeah, K-Trucks, we didn't have those. And there's a lot of businesses doing conversions of K-Trucks for their businesses right now, mobile bars. Right by me, there's a local, two guys that own a restaurant, a local restaurant. They just created this really cool mobile coffee K-Truck. It's called, I'll give a little shout out to the Wake Coffee guys, right? Yeah, they built this, and they serve coffee out of the back of this K-Truck, coffee and egg and cheeses and pork roll egg and cheeses out of the back of this K-Truck on Friday, Saturday, Sunday mornings at a local parking lot by us. Really cool. But again, they don't really care that it's right-hand drive, right?
Yeah.
But somebody that is buying a ROW, 90 or 110 Defender, and they want to drive it around, enjoy it at their beach house or their country house, they care. Right. And if it's right-hand drive, and that buyer is not even going to consider right-hand drives. And if they are going to consider a right-hand drive, it has to be at a deep, deep, deep discount, right? There's an importer not in New Jersey that has, right-hand drives available for, $45,000, and he's not moving anything. I watch them. They're just sitting and sitting and sitting, because you can buy a nice high quality left-hand drive ROW 90 or 110 for 25 to 35 grand. So why would I buy a right-hand drive for 45,000 when I can buy a comparable left-hand drive for 10 to $10 to $20,000 cheaper? Makes absolutely no sense, which is ding 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 why they're not selling, right? So right-hand drives are getting soft, no question. But one big asterisk I'll give for the Land Rover market and the ROW Land Rover market, and I'll call out the NAS market, is investment quality, custom bespoke built ROW Defenders are still doing very well, and there is a buyer pool for those. And when I'm talking about those, I'm talking about like the Helderbergs, the Himalayas, the Brooklyn Coachworks. They're still doing really well in the market, though they're imported ROWs. Those things are bespoke, custom built, high dollar trucks, and that market they want that. The other, outlier market is the NAS. 94, 95, and 97 Defender 90s and 93 Defender 110s are still strong. There's a buyer pool for them. I've seen some transaction with the 93 D110s. Some transactions get soft recently, but I think that's just a little blip on the screen. But 94, 95, 97 NAS D90s are still running the market right now and doing great numbers. And low mileage ones are doing six figures right now.
Wow.
Other truck we're going to hop into that is not doing hot right now that I've talked about in the past is first gen Broncos. Man, the Bronco effect is over.
Yeah.
The market has been satisfied. It's flooded with inventory. Everybody hopped on the bandwagon. Every guy with a Bronco rotting in his barn pulled it out, restored it, did a half-ass job, threw it out into the market, disappointed a buyer, right? Like first-gen Broncos are just, it's a falling knife right now. And I'll drop a quick little story. I had a client call me a couple weeks ago. He had bought a first-gen Bronco in the height of the market, 2022, summer of 2023, and he bought it as a donor vehicle, right?
Okay.
So, and he paid, and I won't use his name, but he paid roughly about $25,000 for this donor vehicle in the top of the market 2022, which at the time was a good price for a donor first gen Bronco.
Right.
So, but then he needed to find somebody to do the restoration, and it's a very extensive frame off restoration. That took him a while, so 2 years later, now the market has changed, and he calls me, he says, Chris, I have this restoration shop that is going to do a Coyote swap, Kinzer chassis, frame off restoration on my donor that I own for $25,000. And oh, by the way, the estimate is $175 to $200. And I said, Mr. Client, I said, that's not bad actually, right? For $175 to $200 for that caliber and 3 to 5,000 man hours, that's actually not that bad. Mm. But the market has changed. So let's talk about the economics real quick. You're going to say, you have a $25,000 donor. It's going to cost you $175,000 to get it to where you want it to be, right? So all in $200,000. And it's going to take somewhere between a year and a half to 2 years to complete that build. So in a year and a half to 2 years, right, you can have what you want for roughly $200,000. Or I have the other option for you. Let's take that donor that you own for $25,000. Let's sell it in the market, right? I have relationships, wholesale relationships. Let's sell it in the market for what it's worth today, about $5,000. Take a $20,000 loss on that truck,
Jeez.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. No, but here's where the economics make sense. We can go out to the market and find an already built, bespoke, custom, frame off restored, frame swapped, Coyote swapped first gen Bronco, right? And I don't want to say what he paid for less than it would cost you to even restore it. Totally. And you can have it next week.
Right.
So basically the economics were, I can wait a year and a half to 2 years and spend $200,000, or I can get one today, factor in my $20,000 loss, and still save an immense amount of money. And obviously we went that route.
Yeah. Right.
So that's crazy how the market changes. But the other, as we get into the end here, we're getting a little long-winded, but I will say the other market that's getting really soft is, and we've already talked about this, two-wheel drive trucks. Yeah. Two-wheel drive trucks, the market is just, the appetite for two-wheel drive trucks and 4x4 or two-wheel drive trucks is just not there. They want 4x4s. Everybody wants 4x4s. The difference in where these things are transacting is massive, between two-wheel drive and their 4x4 counterparts. So two-wheel drives are really having a tough time in the market, no matter what year it is, whether it's early or later collector vehicles. Two-wheel drives are just really having a tough time in the market. There aren't a lot of buyers. There's a lot of them out there. A majority of the trucks that were built built two-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive. So it's just an oversaturated market with a very thin buyer pool and a value-driven buyer pool, whereas four-wheel drives is what everybody wants. And there were two surprises in the first quarter of this year, which I want to highlight real quick before we move on and say goodbye to our audience. The first is second-gen Broncos. So though first-gen Broncos are a falling knife, they're dying in the market, second-gen Broncos are on fire right now. Are you looking at some of these transactions, Brian?
Absolutely. Yeah, the more coming into the market, but the prices are just astounding. Every time I see another one listed on the site, I mean, $60, $70, $80,000. I mean, they're just doing some big numbers right now. Huge cult following. Short production run meant that there was just not as many people as aware of what they were. And they do have a kind of a cool story, right? With Fuel Crisis and supposed to be coming out a lot earlier, but is second-gen Broncos red hot. Can't keep them on the site long enough, but just a great vehicle.
And just so our listeners know, second-gen Broncos only had a 2-year run. It was 1978, 1979. They had a very unique package that was available in that period of time, which was called the freewheeling package, right? So if you get a second-gen Bronco with a Marty report that shows a freewheeling package through the absolute roof right now, and you talk about prices in the $60,000 to $80,000 range. That's just for the good, high quality, either
refurbished,
refurbished or good high quality originals.
Yeah,
the frame off restored LS swapped ones right now are doing huge six-figure numbers. When I tell you huge six-figure numbers, upper hundreds, 185 to, we saw some transactions in the mid to low 300s at some of the auctions in the first quarter. So first-gen, second-gen Broncos just came out of nowhere, and they just are hot in the market. The other one is four-wheel drive GM Action Lines right now. I brought one of those to market in the first quarter of the year for a client, and it was a decent quality driver. It had some refurbishment done, but the amount of demand that I got for that truck was psychotic from all over the world. I had collectors in the Middle East reaching out to me for that.
Really?
I mean, oh man, it was insane.
Very cool.
Action Line GM four-wheel drive trucks right now. My client's truck happened to be a conversion. So it was actually built as a C2500. It had been converted with a K20 frame under previous ownership, and he had converted it to a 1-ton, added some 1-ton axles to it. But a pure play K four-wheel drive Action Line truck right now is just absolutely on fire. There's an immense amount of demand. We're seeing big numbers. Big numbers. And oh, by the way, I got to take a step back. I said LS swapped second-gen Broncos. You should have stopped me there. I meant Coyote swap. I was on a roll.
Well.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. The big dollar second-gen Broncos that are frame off restored with Coyote swaps, the 5.0 swaps, not the LS swaps. But I will say that four-wheel drive K Action Line GM trucks right now that are frame off, fully restored, impeccable investment quality, that have been LS swapped, are doing bonkers numbers. And if they're crew cab, even crazier numbers, because those things were super rare. So those are the big surprises I saw in the market. Brian, you got any other surprises to throw at us before we let the listeners go?
On the other side of things that have not done quite as well, no surprise. I think we all saw JDMs were going to be pulling back, and the expedition vehicles were going to be pulling back at some point. But to see that go so quickly in 1H and Q1 and Q2 of this year was a little surprising to me. I thought that they would have a little bit longer of a run through this year. But no, I think you absolutely nailed it. I would add that I think the travelers, those scout travelers, are going to pick up here pretty quickly. But I was also surprised to not see them pull dollars in the first half of this year. But I think 2H is where they're going to shine.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Brian, thank you again for joining us today on the Classic 4x4 podcast
Hey,
and
my
being
pleasure.
our co-host for the 2024 Collector Truck and 4x4 market review and mid-year market review and outlook. I really appreciate it. For all of you out there that don't follow us on the socials, follow us. You can follow me at Classic 4x4_trucks. Follow Fourbie Exchange at Fourbie Exchange and all the social channels. Check out our websites, classic4x4.com and Fourbie.com, FOURBIE.com. Have a great day. Wow, what a fun episode. I always enjoy talking about the truck and 4x4 markets. And I can't thank Brian Ellis from Fourbie Exchange enough for being a co-host today. His knowledge is absolutely immense. But stay tuned for our next episode, which is going to be a mystery guest, mostly because I haven't scheduled it yet or recorded it yet. But it's going to be a fun one, as always. Have a great day.